And there's a big one at the moment as well that's doing around, a Netflix one, Crime Scene, The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, talking about the disappearance of Elisa Lam. And we wanted to talk about it tonight, and we have to talk about it with people who understand these things a little more than this, yellow-shirted wearing numpty between the songs. So Carole Sawo from the Hebe College in Colchester is with us tonight to have a chat. Evening, Carole. How are you?
Evening, Rob. I'm good, thank you.
The first question really is, Carole, what is so fascinating about this subject in your mind? You've done, as a lecturer and a writer, working on courses of forensic psychology. Is there something in our psyche as humans that draws us towards the
dark side?
I think the darkness was the word I was looking for.
Absolutely there is. If you look at it if we take it from a scientific point of view, then we're not surprised that scientists will explore things like viruses and bacteria. And so from a psychological point of view, we're just doing the same thing, really. We're just looking at, what's happening in that shadow side of our mind, or the subconscious part of the mind. And I think we do it, well, firstly, we have a bit of a morbid fascination. But secondly, we're sort of curious about what's the difference, we think initially, what's the difference between us and them being serial killers. But of course, you walk into one of my lectures and the first thing that I'll tell you is there's not that much difference. And so the way the mind works is really quite straightforward when you've been studying it for as long as I have. But the dark side of the mind contains all the juicy stuff, doesn't it? All the impulses and
to sort of rewind, I had a chat a couple of years ago with Robin Ince, the comedy writer, stand-up comic as well. He'd written a book, and it was all about the sort of the weird and wonderful things your brain thinks of, but you'd never actually do. It's the way your brain considers the daftness of things. And I was having this conversation with him, and I'd only just become an uncle at the time, and my nephew, I'd only just met him for the first time, and he was so tiny, and I was holding him in my arms. And one of the things that went through my head was, if his head fell off right now and fell all the way to the floor, that's in the proportion to his body, that's a long way for his head to fall. And I laughed at myself when I thought it, because it was such a surreal and obscure thing to do. But I guess that's actually exactly what you're saying, is that your brain will always imagine the weird and wonderful, and even the dark and slightly disturbing.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about there is just an ordinary fantasy wish. And so you have them all the time, but you normally have them at night time when you're dreaming. But a fantasy wish can be quite comical. We entertain ourselves quite a lot with our imagination, especially if you're in a meeting or something like that. You can take yourself off somewhere else in your mind. But what I analyse is the differences that you and I hopefully never would be in a position where we would carry out these serial killings. But not everybody, and what I loved about your interview with Nick just there is I actually teach about Eileen Wuornos as well, because I was never convinced she was really a monster. That's what they termed her. And so I bring a real human element to the invisible part of the mind. What can happen is in somebody like Eileen's mind, it's actually even the hearing voices, I could have predicted that, because the fantasy becomes the reality. Why people stop living in reality is because it's just too painful. It's just too rough. It's just too real. And so they regress. It's a defense mechanism in the mind. They regress to the subconscious part of the mind where they can live out their fantasies. And then, of course, they bring them into reality, and that's where you see the killings. They cross what I call the Rubicon.
As soon as you're saying all these things, and I'm visiting so many different people of the world of arts, and I mean this in the most respectful way possible, because like Nick said, whilst he got to know Eileen and in a way began to sort of like her as a person, and discovered she was really good at drawing. She would do these biro drawings and things, and they would write to each other and stuff like that. And I can totally understand. There's that the sort of side of you that thinks, well, this is a person, and clearly some reason has caused her to be the way she is now, but obviously there's a sympathy for the victims of someone like a serial killer anyway. But you say about the way that the way that reality becomes too painful. But I wonder if there's a part of the brain, and this might be where your real specialist knowledge comes in, here, but when the life becomes too boring, you become a bit strange and weird and odd. And I, immediately go to some of my favourite comedians, like sort of Ross Noble and Noel Fielding, who are a bit trippy and a bit weird. And the reason that they think such, colourful and weird and wonderful worlds is because they're bored of normal society. And would that be a similar thing? And it's just that being bored of being bored of life, and then reality being too painful. Like,
Yes.
as Nick was saying, Eileen had a really, really traumatic upbringing. A father and a grandfather who abused her, and that trauma will lead to consequences.
Absolutely. Childhood trauma will definitely lead to that kind of behaviour. In fact, if you said about tripping and being weird, so that's a prerequisite to come into my class. So when you look at the artistic mind, it is amazingly creative, and you have to manage that mind, that kind of mind. So the artistic genius is right on the extremities of consciousness. But it's all about bringing yourself back into reality. That's the skill. So some artists really do go quite out there, and it's very common for geniuses. They say it's a fine line between madness and genius. But actually, my first book, Pandora's Panacea, is on holographic works of art. So I was analysing a painting, The Scream, for one of my lectures. But I noticed how actually between the artwork and our mind, it's very similar. And so you almost have to be a little nuts to be able to understand this. And certainly if you're going to study serial killers, what I would say is you have to stop thinking logically. You to understand the world that they're now in, you have to not think like you. And so for example, I'll give you an everyday example, when it comes to a courtroom, people are often surprised why killers don't show remorse. I'm only surprised that people are surprised, because if you think about it, we probably can't say all of, for example, Eileen's history. It is horrendous. None of us would have survived that, none of us, and been sane. But actually, she contextualised the killing. She was a pattern murderer, so she only went for a certain type of man. So she didn't drive down the high street and just kill anybody. So when you look at behind the conscious mind, so what I do, I teach my students how to go into the subconscious mind. Now, I heard you say earlier that you're not sure why we're all fascinated, but you do actually do sign language. Now, that's what I do. You see, there's the common theme. You see, I just decode the crime scene. I decode the subconscious, so the invisible part of the mind. And that is, you can tie threads across. So you look at the crime scene, but you trace it back. So why wouldn't somebody show remorse in a courtroom? Well, they have shut down a part of their mind to enable them to do that crime in the first place. So ordinary people think, well, they're suddenly going to feel really remorseful and we'll see tears, which is a requirement to have a lesser sentence. But the truth is, they're not going to, because to enable them to do the crime in the first place, their mind had been altered in some way. So it's not going to suddenly...
And irreversibly, I suspect, as well. Once you've gone, like you say, that kind of, that line...
The Rubicon.
Crossed, you can't go back past it.
That's quite right. I mean, I call it crossing the Rubicon. We have a part in the mind. I like to keep forensic because it's quite gory and deep. Especially I'm keeping it light. Can you believe, with you this evening?
No, it's absolutely fine. I appreciate that. It might be someone tucking into a Ruby Murray tonight and they're thinking, "Oh, brilliant! Thanks for this, Bob."
Well, that is a curry is the preferred medium of a female killer. Let me tell you.
I didn't say that with knowledge. I was just picking a meal at random. I could have said spag bowl. But there's probably something about spag bowl now that Carole's going to share with us.
Well, you see, we have to get more creative. We haven't got such the physical strength, you see, but we're silent and deadly. So, that's. I'm not suggesting to any of your listeners this is what to do.
No, please absolutely do not. So in case Ofcom are listening in this evening for the one time this year. No, I mean, Adam, I say, I understand the fascination. I was fascinated enough to take up psychology A-level, and I love working in the mind. I'm really fascinated by the way the music works in the mind. So I understand the intrigue from some people to love shows and documentaries that specifically talk about serial killers, and I'll come back to that trail of thought in a second. But I'm always really fascinated by the way music can make you feel euphoric and incredibly sad, dependent on the connection it has with a time and a place, a person perhaps, maybe the words hit a particular tone for you, or I understand that there will be triggers and things, but Adam was asking earlier when we were talking about it, like, do you reckon motive is quite a big part of being a serial killer? Because, as you say, there's stuff that leads up to someone not being stable enough to control then those urges and say, no, this is wrong. But does motive play quite a big part in it as well?
Motive definitely plays a part in it. What I teach is unusual. So I teach that there is a reason for absolutely every single crime. Now, when you're watching crime programmes on television, a lot of people, sometimes unfortunately even professionals, will say, well, we don't know why. But there are only two reasons for absolutely every crime. This is something that's going in my next book more. But for now, it's... if you work out what somebody's motive is, so let's say you get to a crime scene and it's chaos and obviously they're not there, but if you have a look at the crime scene and before you go into the forensic analysis, if you just look at the story, so you're saying about artwork, if you just look at the storyboard that's in front of you, the chaos that's in front of you, you trace the story back. So you imagine that, say, you've done that killing, and then so where would you have been half an hour before then, and where would you have been that morning, and then yesterday, what do you think happened, and then if you did that, why might you have done that? What were you after? What were you hoping to gain from it? So motive traces all the way back to the subconscious mind, and you look at the crime scene, but actually the first crime scene is in the mind, and it's usually happened in childhood.
Wow. Is anyone else's brain swelling a little bit? Like, it's just, like you've just taken in a load of information, and not only are you going, it makes all perfect sense, but now I can't actually see the colour green. This is incredible. Carole, thank you so much. The reason that Carole does what she does and her lecturing as well. And I think it's a really important point to make, Carole, is that, when you watch a show, they tell you how they did it, but they never necessarily discuss the why.
That's absolutely right. And for me, that was, I come from a psychoanalytic perspective. So, for example, if you're at university just studying criminology, you study the crime, psychology will take you into the mind, but psychoanalysis takes you into the actual why. So we look at the brain, but we look at the mind. So one of the questions is the brain and the mind the same thing, but we won't go into that at the moment. But I'm always fascinated with the why, and what I've found is there's this knee-jerk reaction to assume that it must be just a chemical in the brain. So there's no gene for crime. There's not. I mean, you think that through. If there was a gene for crime, somebody would have come up with the antidote and they'd be a millionaire by now. And also then people can say, well, I didn't do it, it's my brain that did it. Now there is some biological aspect of that, but what we said in the break there, which I think is really relevant to your listeners, is through no fault of our own, life happens, and if you have three major events, like a divorce, you lose your job, or you suddenly have a significant loss, then any of us can feel not so bright and sunny, and we go into sort of the more shadow aspects of mind where we can be a bit vulnerable really, and if we don't really understand what's going on. So my whole motivation is to say to people, actually, you're very normal. Even sometimes the darker thoughts that we have are very predictable. It's just that we don't act on them. So the secret is you just let those thoughts go back out.
Is there something? Sorry, is there something in letting the thoughts out? I'm just thinking the way you sort of talk about that having the sort of the darker thought that goes through your head.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about those who make dark comedy.
Yes.
Is there a benefit to actually letting the idea or the thought, should I say, out of the brain, sort of saying it out loud, because that way you've kind of not hung on to it and dwelled on it, you've just let it kind of go?
Absolutely, it makes total sense. In fact, what I'd say is Most people that contact me, whether it's in class or privately, they're really worried that they have this sort of dark thought that pops into their mind. Well, certain times of our life we're more sort of psychologically vulnerable, and we have the life and the death instinct, which is not discussed anywhere else. I integrate it into my course. It's just part of being human, you know. We have these impulses and instincts, this kind of angel on one side, the demon on the other, and so we think, oh my God, am I going mad because I have these two parts to my personality? But it's very normal, and so it's just, you can even use a simple technique like breathing or meditation is absolutely brilliant for the mind, because what happens is, let's say something pops into your mind and you think, oh, I'm not sure I like that thought. So all you really need to do is just become an observer of it. So you just witness it. And this is I'm giving your listeners a major tip here for life, because you don't have to act on it. That's the difference. Don't worry about having it, but let it go sooner. That is the real secret.
I guess it's no different from having a craving to eat some chocolate you don't really need. And I don't mean to trivialise it, but right. your brain can say, oh, go on, have it. And you go, well, no, I shouldn't really, so I won't. And then your brain goes, go on, kick that person off the train platform. Yeah. And you go, well, obviously don't do that, you know.
Yeah.
And yes, the one is very light, but you ignore that train of thought about the chocolate or eating the treat you shouldn't have, because it does the consequences of it are not as severe as the consequences of doing what I just said.
That's right.
And I guess it's just accepting that you can observe that thought, but let it go.
Just observe it, let it go. The other things you can do, you can journal it. So let's say you've been through a really tough time and this happens more than it ever did, or that it's just started happening and you're worried about it. You can put this sort of thing into journals. What we do is we sublimate it, so you can put it into music, which is brilliant. You know, these are just really safe outlets for our emotional experiences. And I think the real problem is, and I hope what's going to come out of this COVID situation is that people are going to open up conversations now with men as well. Because I've noticed in the last couple of years, more men are walking into my seminars, and it's always a pleasure to see. And we open up the emotional dialogue, because we're at one level we're all the same, we're all human, aren't we? We all have our anxieties. We want to be approved of, we want to be accepted, and we want to stay out of pain as much as possible. So that the way forward is to discuss these aspects. And if you study the criminal mind, you see you can make sense of your own mind. It doesn't mean that you're going to go over that way. It just means that you're actually a very normal human. And we're just coming up with these techniques to manage what life can be quite difficult sometimes.
It's such a field of growth right now as well, understanding the mind, isn't it? We've been probably quite good in the last, let's say, 100 years. I know medical sort of physical, sort of medicine has got a lot better over the last few hundred years, but let's maybe not go back too far, because it was a bit archaic for a while. But our medical understanding of the body, physical body, has been a huge thing over the last 100 years. But it's only probably been, what, dare I say, 20 years where we've really started to try to understand the mind more and more.
And I think you've got people that, so for example, if you are ever in a psychology lecture and somebody tells you that there's two parts of the mind, their reading is already limited, because what's really important is to understand there's a third component right in the middle, which is where all our mind defences live. And so for you, this might be the first time you've heard of this, but for me, this is kind of old hat. So get yourself start off with a foundation in psychology, and then go into psychoanalysis, and then even into philosophy. And then that takes you into more artistic world. And then what you do is come all the way round again. So my perspective on things is unusual, but it won't be in a few years' time. But I study patterns in artwork, in music, in criminal minds. And so you can, if you study the pattern, you can predict what's going to happen next. So it gets really, really exciting. We're not even touching on how majorly we get so excited in my lectures, like all of us, all the time.
I can hear you smiling, Carole, because
Yeah.
you get into the bit where you're like, oh, this is the good bit. Ross, let me tell you about this bit. This is the really good bit. I can literally hear you smiling, Carole.
Well, your listeners might not be quite prepared, and people that walk into class are obviously prepared. So I'll just have to contain myself a little bit. But where it gets really fascinating is like symbolism. And when you listen to people like criminals talk, the conscious part of the mind, they might be, for example, trying to lie. Now, how you spot a liar, there's this pop psychology. Are they looking up to one side? No, I mean, we don't do pop psychology in my class. But how do you spot a liar? It's actually, one of the ways is listen to their tone of voice. Because in what we call paralinguistics, that it's the voice underneath the voice. And sometimes they can't help but reveal themselves. So even somebody smart like, we've got a serial killer in America, BTK. He actually sent the police his own identity. Although consciously he was trying to stay anonymous. But subconsciously, you see, the subconscious mind can't lie. And so you give yourself, so if I'm analysing somebody, they think they're, telling me one thing, but all the time I'm thinking, no, I can see what's really going on. So you're saying this, but I actually can think, I can hear something else. So when you're listening, for example, you listen to what they're saying, you listen to what they are trying to say, and then you've got to listen to what they mean. And this is a good tip for parents and children. Children lack a language, so you have to be the difference. It's the same with your sign language. You have to listen, what are they trying to say? But then the real skill comes in, what have they not said?
Right, now, if anyone feels like their mind's... imagine trying to do your job, where your job is to talk out loud to someone who's just told you they can analyse what you're saying or not saying, or maybe saying in the other way with the unspoken voice underneath. Yeah, now I feel really conscious about everything that's coming out of my mouth. This is, I mean...
Rob, you're normal.
I'm very much not normal, I can tell you that much, Carole. Yeah, I tell you what, if there was a mind you'd love to be inside, this one is a psychologist's dream.
Actually, most people think that most people say to me, oh, you never understand my mind. But then you sit through a couple of lectures and you'll find you are very normal. You are.
Oh, that'd be a dream day for me to find out this is quite normal minds to have, I tell you. But no, I mean, like you say, right at the very start, when I sort of introduced this just after 8 o'clock, to say, I get the fascination that we have with the world of serial killers. The stories of serial killers and why we are making so many more dramas and documentaries as well, which I think is more the side of kind of what to focus on. I get the intrigue and I get the curiosity that we all have for it. The bit I can't get my head around still even now is understanding how you could be fascinated enough to watch something like that or make something like that. I mean, hats off to Nick Broomfield, who we had talked to earlier, for being able to invest his life and time in making a documentary about a serial killer and spending over a decade with said person, to switch your mind off from that and then go about your normal day and go to the shops and, top up get some milk and some bread. It's actually given me a small headache in the front of my head, just trying to work out how you separate that particular thing. I get it, but and I hope this has been as enjoyable a listen this evening to hear about, because now I think to myself, I'd want to go and watch a serial killer documentary to see if I feel or think any differently watching it to how I would have done just yesterday, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think still watch the documentaries, but I'd be happier if there were more people. I mean, maybe if anybody's listening, there are some things that I've put out there on free videos they can watch. My next book is all about why. So I watch the programs that you watch about. I don't go into the nitty gritty of really what they did, because when you're making, say, a documentary, you're studying one story. Well, that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to understand all of our stories. I wanted to see, how we can just enjoy life and understand what is an invisible aspect of us and actually normalise it for people. So, in my videos you'll see I always draw like a head or something, so I'm showing people so that you can make sense of this invisible quality that makes us up. But let me leave you with perhaps another tip. I'm not sure how we're doing for time.
No, it's fine, go on.
Yeah, so one of the best defence mechanisms is in fact humour. Because, you know, I was saying about when reality gets tough, we disappear into fantasy. Then we've got defence mechanisms then like denial and repression and regression. There's hundreds of them. So it keeps you in that fantasy. So it's hard to kind of, like you're saying, go to the shop to get a loaf of bread. Sometimes people find that hard to do because they've got so much in their mind that's worrying them and bothering them. But actually, if there's one defence mechanism that is so brilliant because it doesn't deny reality, it sort of jokes with it, and that is humour. So humour's a wonderful quality. So always find something to laugh about, people to laugh, you know, with you about things as well.
I'm always about the laughter, you know that. Love and laughter on this show. Full throttle on this show. Carole, where can we find you? And I say you've got some books out. Remind us of the names of the books that you've got out at the moment. I know you work at the Hebe College in Colchester as well, so people could perhaps get in touch about maybe joining a course in the near future, whether it be online or hopefully in person. What's the names of your books you got out at the moment, Carole?
Okay, well, the my first book, Pandora's Panacea, it's real deep psychology, but that's now sold out again, and with the COVID situation, so now that's an e-book. You can get that online from my website and on Amazon, but from my website. Decluttering the Mind is an everyday book I've written for everyday people that helps them understand their mind is like a house, and I take them around the house to do some cleaning, so make their mind better.
My mind is just under the stairs. just the entire cupboard under the stairs.
You've gone to hide under the stairs.
Yeah, hot water bottles and a light bulb for a fitting you don't even have anymore.
And then, so Hebe College, I created it, and obviously with COVID it's all now online. So I've just started some live classes. Next, on the 1st of March, we're starting the forensic classes online. That's going to be once a month, so you can jump on those. And then there are lots of things in the studies. So I've got the psychology of depression is there for people. That's a live lecture I gave, so you can watch that. And then there's I wrote a course for people at the moment, especially because of a lot of people that are alone in isolation. And I know what happens to a mind in isolation. So everyday people, you see, when we're not communicating, the mind regresses to that fantasy place that I was telling you about. And so it's just a little course to say, you're perfect, you're doing great. Do these little things during the day, and you know, we'll all get out of this and laugh about it.
We will laugh about it. One day there'll be a time we're in the pub and go, cheer in the 2020. Oh, I didn't change my socks for 4 weeks. It was amazing. What a time to be alive. Carole, it's been a real pleasure having you on tonight. Thank you so much. And I appreciate you've only just scratched the surface of this. So if people want some more information, they can find you Carole Sawo, Hebe College is Hebe College. And you can obviously go and find all the books from the website as well. Stay safe, Carole. Thank you so much again for your time this evening.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
You take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Wow. Just when you thought that might be it, hold on to your hats.